There is a kind of power that most people spend their entire lives chasing in the wrong places. They chase it through louder arguments, through longer speeches, through the desperate need to have the final word in every room they enter. And yet the most powerful men and women in history, the ones who moved empires, shaped thought, and mastered themselves, understood something that the crowd never does. The most devastating thing you can do in the right moment is absolutely nothing. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. He commanded legions. He negotiated with senators, philosophers, enemies, and sycophants. And yet, if you read his private journals, the collection of thoughts we now call the Meditations, what you find is not a man obsessed with the sound of his own voice. What you find is a man at war, with unnecessary speech, a man who returned, again and again, to a single discipline that he considered foundational to everything else: the discipline of silence. Today we are going to explore 9 specific situations in which Marcus Aurelius and the broader Stoic tradition teach us to remain silent. Not out of cowardice, not out of indifference, but out of a deep, practiced, deliberate wisdom that separates the person who merely reacts from the person who truly governs themselves. Welcome to Stoic Zeno, where we take the ancient wisdom of the Stoics and bring it into the sharpest possible contact with modern life. If this kind of content speaks to you, if you believe that the philosophy of the ancient world holds answers that our age desperately needs, then take a moment right now to like this video. Leave a comment below, telling me which of these 9 situations resonates most with you personally. Share this with someone who you think needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so that this wisdom finds you every single week. Now let us begin. Situation 1. When your anger is still burning. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger and grief than the circumstances that aroused them in us." Read that again. Not the thing that made you angry, the anger itself. The Stoics understood something about the architecture of the emotional mind that modern neuroscience has only recently confirmed. When you are in the grip of rage, you are not yourself. The rational faculty, what the Stoics called the hegemonikon, the ruling part of the mind, has been temporarily overwhelmed by passion. And anything you say from that place will not come from your best self. It will come from your worst. This is not a minor observation. This is a foundational principle. When anger is active, your words will be weapons aimed carelessly. You will say things that are disproportionate to the offense. You will say things that cannot be unsaid. You will escalate when de-escalation serves you better. You will destroy in 3 minutes of fury what took 3 years to build in trust. The Stoic prescription is not suppression. Marcus Aurelius was not asking you to deny that you feel anger. He was asking you to delay your response long enough for reason to reassert itself. Epictetus, the freed slave, who became one of the most influential philosophers in Roman history, taught that the gap between stimulus and response is where your freedom lives. Most people have no gap. Something happens and they react. The Stoic cultivates that gap with intention. So, what does this look like in practice? It looks like the person in a heated meeting who goes quiet instead of escalating. It looks like the man who receives a provocative message and does not respond until the next morning. It looks like the woman who, in the middle of a family argument, says nothing and walks to another room, not because she has nothing to say, but because she knows that what she has to say right now would cause damage she will spend weeks repairing. Silence in anger is not weakness. It is the most precise form of self-control available to a human being. It is the discipline that Marcus Aurelius practiced on himself. a man who had more power than almost anyone who ever lived, and who still understood that the most important battle, always the one happening inside him. Situation 2. When you are in the presence of a fool, there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to reason with someone who has no intention of being reasoned with. You have felt it. The circular argument that goes nowhere. The conversation where every piece of evidence you offer is deflected, distorted, or dismissed. The debate where winning is impossible, not because you lack the better argument, but because your opponent has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for you to stop talking. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. Knowing things for what they are includes knowing a person for who they are. And sometimes the honest assessment is that a person is not engaging in good faith. They are not curious. They are not open. They are performing disagreement, not participating in dialogue. The Stoic does not waste energy on such encounters. This is not arrogance. It is discernment. Time, attention, and mental energy are finite resources. The Stoics were ruthlessly clear about this. Marcus Aurelius himself complained in his meditations about the time lost to frivolous conversations and social obligations that produced no wisdom, no growth, no real connection. He was the emperor of Rome. He could not always escape such things, but he recorded his frustration with them, and he recorded his commitment to protecting the inner life from contamination by noise. When you argue passionately with someone who is not listening, you do not change them. You exhaust yourself. You lower the quality of your own thinking by immersing it in poor thinking. And you give that person something they secretly wanted: your reaction, your frustration, your investment. Silence denies them all three. The Stoic approach is not contempt. It is not hostility. It is the quiet recognition that this is not a conversation worth entering, and the discipline to act on that recognition, rather than on the impulse to prove yourself right. Walk past debate. Let the foolish thing be said without your endorsement, your correction, or your outrage. The world will not end because you let something go. Situation 3. When you are about to reveal too much too soon. Seneca wrote in one of his famous letters to Lucilius, "Retire into yourself as much as you can." There is a profound relationship between what you keep private and how much power you retain over your own life. The Stoics were not advocates of dishonesty. They were advocates of discretion. These are entirely different things. We live in an age that fetishizes disclosure. Vulnerability has been rebranded as a virtue so absolute that people now compete to reveal more, share more, confess more, often to audiences who have not earned that intimacy and who will not necessarily handle it with care. Social media has industrialized the performance of the inner life, and most people have completely lost the instinct that once told human beings, not everything needs to be said, and not everyone deserves to know. What does this mean in the Stoic framework? It means that your plans, before they are executed, are fragile things. When you speak about what you intend to do, several things happen. First, you dissipate the internal energy that would otherwise drive you toward action. There is research on this. The social reality created by telling people your goals can create a premature sense of completion, reducing your motivation to actually follow through. The Stoics did not have this research, but they had the observation. They noticed that the man who talked loudly about what he was going to do was rarely the same man who quietly did it. Second, when you reveal your intentions too early, you invite interference. Not always malicious interference. Sometimes it is well-meaning advice that introduces doubt. Sometimes it is competitive interference from people who now know what you are building and can work to undermine it. Sometimes it is simply the energy of too many opinions contaminating what was a clean and personal direction. The Stoic keeps counsel with himself. He shares selectively with people who have demonstrated that they can be trusted with the contents of his mind. He understands that mystery is not deception. It is protection. The depth of a man's character is revealed not by how freely he speaks, but by how thoughtfully he chooses when not to. Situation 4. When someone wants to pick a fight. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded his entire adult life by men who wanted something from him. Senators who wanted power, generals who wanted glory, philosophers who wanted to be associated with the emperor's endorsement, and occasionally, people who simply wanted to provoke him, to see if they could rattle the man who sat at the center of the world's most powerful empire. He wrote about this with disarming honesty. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The person trying to provoke you is, in the Stoic analysis, attempting to use your own mind against you. They are trying to make you a tool of their agenda. They want your anger, your defensiveness, your wounded pride, because those reactions validate their attack and put you at a disadvantage. The most complete refusal you can offer someone who wants to fight with you is a silence, so calm, so unbothered, that it communicates something deeply unsettling to the aggressor. You are not available for this, not because you are afraid, not because they have wounded you into silence, but because this fight does not interest you, and your peace of mind is not for sale at any price they are offering. This is not easy. It runs against every instinct that evolution installed in the human nervous system. When someone attacks, the body wants to defend, the voice wants to rise, the face wants to harden. The Stoic practice is the practice of overriding those instincts, not denying them, but governing them, and choosing a response that serves your actual interests rather than your momentary pride. In practice, this looks like the person who is insulted in public and does not take the bait. It looks like the professional who is undermined in a meeting and addresses it later, privately, rather than making a spectacle. It looks like the partner in a relationship who recognizes a pattern of provocation and refuses to participate in it, while still addressing the underlying issue with calm directness at the appropriate time. Silence in the face of provocation is not the same as accepting poor treatment. It is the choice to address real problems on your terms, not on the terms of whoever is trying to destabilize you. Situation 5. When you have already made your point, one of the most underappreciated forms of eloquence is knowing when you have said enough. Most people, when they sense that they are not being agreed with, respond by saying the same thing again, but louder, or longer, or with more elaborate justification. This is a pattern driven by anxiety and ego, and the Stoics had little patience for it. Epictetus wrote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." There is something almost architectural in that observation. The design of the human form, in the Stoic reading, suggests that listening was meant to be the dominant activity of communication. Speak your piece. Speak it clearly, with precision and conviction, and then stop. Let it land. Let the other person process it. Let silence do the work that additional words will only undo. The person who cannot stop talking after making a good point is revealing their own insecurity. They do not trust their argument to stand on its own. They keep reinforcing it, Because, somewhere, underneath the words, they are not sure it is strong enough. The person who states something true and then falls quiet is demonstrating the rarest form of confidence. The confidence of a person who has said what needs to be said and does not need your validation to know it was worth saying. In negotiation, this principle is legendary. Skilled negotiators know that the first person to speak after an offer is placed on the table is usually the one who blinks. The silence after the offer is not empty, it is active. It creates pressure. It communicates that you are comfortable and unhurried. It gives the other party space to reveal their own anxiety, their own eagerness, their own willingness to move toward you. Marcus Aurelius applied this to philosophical discourse as much as to governance. There is no record of him as a man who needed to dominate every conversation. There is abundant record of him as a man who chose his words with care, said what was necessary, and then returned to the interior work of thinking. Situation 6. When you do not have all the facts, the Stoics were deeply committed to the concept of the reserved assent, the practice of withholding judgment until your understanding of a situation is complete enough to justify it. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme throughout the Meditations. Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Rushing to speak before you understand is a form of disrespect to the situation, to the people involved, and to the truth itself in contemporary life. The pressure to have an opinion immediately about everything has reached an almost pathological intensity. Something happens in the world, and within minutes, there are thousands of confident voices explaining exactly what it means, exactly who is to blame, and exactly what should be done. Most of these voices know nothing. They are constructing certainty out of the first available fragments of information, driven by the social reward that comes from being seen to have a position. The Stoic approach is not silence born of indifference. It is silence born of intellectual honesty. The Stoic is comfortable saying, "I do not yet know enough about this to speak usefully." This is not a passive statement. It is an active commitment to the quality of thought before the quality of speech. In personal relationships, this matters enormously. How many conflicts have been ignited by someone responding to a misunderstanding they never bothered to fully investigate? How many relationships have been damaged by conclusions drawn too quickly? Accusations made before the full picture emerged, judgments passed that later proved to be entirely wrong. The discipline of silence in the face of incomplete information is the discipline of epistemic humility. It is the recognition that your first interpretation of events is not necessarily the correct one. It is the practice of holding the question open long enough for the answer to actually arrive, rather than substituting the discomfort of uncertainty with the false comfort of a premature conclusion. Situation 7. When silence itself is the message, there are situations in which anything you say will diminish the weight of what needs to be communicated. A friend loses someone they love deeply. A colleague fails publicly and is sitting with the humiliation of it. Someone has done something that has genuinely hurt you, and they know it, and they are waiting to see how you will respond. In these moments, the Stoic tradition invites us to consider that presence. Full, quiet, unhurried presence can communicate more than language. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the Stoic duty of care toward other human beings, what the Greeks called philanthropia, the love of humanity. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can offer another person is the gift of being with them in their difficulty. without the need to fill it with words. This is a lost art in a culture where awkward silence has become almost intolerable, where people reach for their phones, for reassuring platitudes, for immediate attempts to fix what cannot be fixed, simply because they cannot sit with the discomfort of not knowing what to say. The person who can remain present and silent in difficult moments is offering something rare. They are saying through their silence, "I am not going anywhere. I am not trying to rush past what you are feeling. I am not performing sympathy for my own comfort. I am here, and I am with you in this. And I do not need to hear myself speak in order to know that I am doing something valuable right now." There is also a version of this that operates in conflict. When you have been wronged, and the person who wronged you knows it, your silence can carry a gravity that no accusation can match. You do not need to explain your pain to them. They already know. The silence that follows a betrayal is not empty. It is full of everything that was lost. And sometimes, allowing it to simply be what it is, rather than converting it immediately into words and arguments and demands for explanation, is the most honest response available. Spor. Situation 8. When you are tempted to gossip, Marcus Aurelius was blunt on this point. In Book 3 of the Meditations, he wrote something that cuts through centuries with its precision. Avoid talking about other people's business unnecessarily. Don't comment on others' activities, or speculate about their motives, or judge their choices. The man who is doing the real work of philosophy has no time for this, and no interest in it. Gossip is one of the most socially accepted forms of cruelty that exists. It is so normalized that people engage in it without recognizing it as a violation of the absent person's dignity, of the trust that exists in social groups, and of the gossiper's own character. Because here is what the Stoics understood clearly. Every time you speak poorly of someone who is not present, you are not merely spreading information. You are training yourself. You are reinforcing a habit of mind that finds its satisfaction in other people's failures, flaws, and misfortunes. You are cultivating smallness. The Stoic standard is demanding. Marcus Aurelius held himself to a discipline of speech that most people would find almost impossibly restrictive. Not because he was joyless or antisocial. The historical record suggests he was actually a man of warmth and genuine affection for the people in his life. But because he understood that the contents of his mind were the most important thing he was responsible for, and that what he allowed himself to say was a direct reflection of what he was allowing himself to think. Practically speaking, this means that when the conversation in the room turns to what someone else is doing wrong, who is failing at what, which colleague is struggling, which friend made a poor choice, the Stoic exercise is to decline to participate. Not with a lecture, not with an ostentatious display of moral superiority, simply with quiet redirection or genuine silence or a change of subject. The people who notice will either respect it or find it inconvenient. Either response tells you something valuable about them. Situation 9. When your inner work is not yet complete, the ninth, and perhaps deepest situation in which the Stoic tradition calls for silence is the one that takes place entirely inside yourself. There is a form of internal noise that functions identically to external noise. The constant self-narration, the relentless internal argument, the mind that cannot stop, rehearsing grievances, rehearsing conversations, planning speeches that will never be given to people who will never hear them. Marcus Aurelius understood this form of noise as one of the primary obstacles to genuine wisdom. The meditations themselves are largely an exercise in trying to quiet this internal chatter, to return again and again to the present moment, to what is actually happening, rather than to the endless story the mind constructs about what is happening, what might happen, what should have happened, and what someone else should have said or done or been. The practice of external silence is in many ways a training ground for this deeper practice. When you train yourself to pause before speaking, when you train yourself to endure the discomfort of not filling every external silence with words, you are also building the muscle that allows you to sit more quietly inside your own mind. The two practices reinforce each other. The person who is always performing, always explaining, always defending themselves to others, is usually also the person who cannot stop explaining and defending themselves to themselves, running the same loops at the same volume without resolution. Stoic philosophy understood silence not as absence but as a form of presence. The silence that comes from completed interior work, from having genuinely examined your assumptions, sat with your discomfort long enough to understand it, made peace with what cannot be changed, and committed clearly to what can. That silence is not emptiness. It is density. It is the stillness that exists at the center of something very solid. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." The path to that power runs directly through the practice of silence, not the silence of the person who has nothing to say. The silence of the person who has examined everything and chosen, with full awareness, what is worth saying and what is not. That is the silence of a Stoic. That is the silence of a sovereign. 9 situations. 9 invitations to step back from the noise and inhabit the kind of inner discipline that the Stoics consider the foundation of everything else worth building. We have been told by our culture that silence is awkward, that quiet people are hiding something, that the person who speaks most is the person who matters most. The Stoics looked at this and said, the opposite is almost always true. The person who speaks without thinking serves the moment and loses themselves. The person who thinks without speaking serves themselves and, ultimately, everyone around them. Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything that noise would drown out. It is the space in which wisdom becomes visible. It is the discipline through which the Stoic, through which you reclaim sovereignty over the one territory that can never be taken from you, the territory of your own mind. Marcus Aurelius spent his life at the intersection of supreme external power and rigorous internal discipline. He understood, better than almost anyone, that the second was the source of the first, that without the inner order, the outer power was nothing, that without the silence in which real thought becomes possible, the words that follow are just noise, and the world has more than enough of that already. Practice the 9, not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately, and with the understanding that every time you choose silence over reflex, over ego, over the need to be heard for its own sake, you are doing the same work that Marcus Aurelius did in the privacy of his journals 2,000 years ago. You are building a mind that you can actually live in. You are becoming, slowly and with effort and with failure and with return, the kind of person that the Stoics believed every human being had the capacity to become: governed, grounded, free. That is all for today's video. If this reached something in you, if one of these 9 situations lit up something you recognize from your own life, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me which situation resonates most with you. Or tell me about a time when silence would have served you better than the words you chose. This community grows when we think together. And your perspective matters here. If you found value in this video, please take 5 seconds to like it. It tells the algorithm that this kind of depth is worth sharing, and it helps this channel reach the people who need it most. Share this with someone in your life who you think is ready for this kind of thinking. And if you have not yet subscribed to Stoic Zeno, this is the moment. Every week we go deep into the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and the broader Stoic tradition, not as a history lesson, but as a living practice that belongs in your life right now. The Stoics believed that philosophy was not something you studied. It was something you lived. Come back next week and let us keep living it together.